Here's a fact that might surprise you. Many retirees will end the retirement with more money than they started with. And not because they're amazing investors, although you may be, but because they were afraid to spend their savings. If you've watched my videos, you know I have two passions. One, helping people retire without worry, and two, giving people permission to spend their hard-earned money. This video brings those two passions together. And I'm going to share with you some data later in the video that I think is going to surprise you. But first, my name is Kevin Lum. I'm a certified financial planner, and this channel is dedicated to helping 1 million people retire without worry. Transitioning into retirement brings many challenges. Creating a new daily rhythm, finding a new way to make sense of your day now that you're not going to work, finding ways to be around people, if you like that sort of thing, outside of work, feeling lost or without purpose now that you don't have a job, and if you're married, getting used to being around your partner all day long. But there's one challenge that I think impacts more of my clients than any other challenge, and it's the consumption gap. Let me explain. In a study from the Journal of Financial Planning, researchers discovered something fascinating. Many retirees spend much less than theory predicts they could, theory being the 4% rule, for example. Most people don't even come close. Rather than spending down their savings, many retirees' assets hold steady and even increase over their retirement. In fact, many retirees, many of you watching this video, continue saving money in retirement. Now, you might think, well, sure, it's been a great market. But one of the studies actually looked at the years 2000 to 2008, which were terrible times for retirement portfolios. And even during those challenging years, wealthier retirees' assets continued to grow. And before you put in the comments, well, I'm not wealthy, it doesn't apply to me. The study defined wealthy as people who had $700,000 or more, or somewhere in that ballpark. This led researchers to define what they call the consumption gap, the difference between what portfolios could support and what retirees actually spend. And this is a bit of a passion project for me. I'm passionate about giving people permission to spend their money. And some of this is personal. My dad and my great-grandfather both died in their 50s. And that perspective changes how you think about money and spending money. But I've seen the same thing working with clients. One of my favorite stories is I was encouraging a client to take their dream trip, and they had more than enough money. In fact, their pension and Social Security basically covered all their expenses. And I was encouraging them to take the trip, and they said, well, I don't have enough money. And I replied, you have $4 million in your IRA. And they replied, yes, but that's for retirement. And I blurted out, probably faster than I should have, you are retired. Now, there are a couple of reasons people don't spend their money. Many of you watching have built wealth through delayed gratification. You have chosen to forego certain things in life in order to save money. But the question becomes, if not now, when? And the truth of the matter is, switching from a savings mindset to a spending mindset is incredibly difficult, especially when you've spent your whole life habiting yourself to be a person who saves. And so when you've learned to save well, it almost feels wrong to give yourself permission to spend money. That's the first issue. The second issue that keeps people from spending money is uncertainty. And there are a number of things that cause this uncertainty. Longevity risk, right? You don't know how long you're going to live. Inflation risk, costs could double or triple or quadruple over the next 30 years. And then another risk is market risk, right? Bad early returns could derail everything. You've seen my videos on the sequence of return risk. You know what could happen. Well, the result of these two issues, right? The moving from saving to spending, and then just uncertainty, it causes retirees to be overly conservative with their spending. In many cases, significantly so. One of my favorite stories I had from meeting with some clients a couple of years ago was they had about $7 million in savings, and they also had enough money from their pension and some other piles of money to cover all of their expenses. These people were never going to run out of money. And they were fairly far along in the retirement. I think they were about 75, 76 years of age. And one of the questions that came up when we were presenting the plan was, can we afford to buy a new front door? And of course, my answer was, Of course, you can buy a new front door. You could buy 100 new front doors and you're going to be fine. So let me share some data from Michael Kitces, who is kind of the guru of financial planning. He's one of the most well-respected financial planners in the country. And he did some research on retirement spending, partially inspired by that journal article that I mentioned. So he looked at two different scenarios. So in his first scenario, scenario A, he has has $1 million in a balanced portfolio, and they want to spend down their money and end the retirement with $0. So he plans for a 30-year retirement with a 3% rate of inflation and an 8% average market return, which, by the way, a 60-40 portfolio has had a return slightly over 8% over the past 40 years on an annualized basis. So he looks at it and says, look, this person wants to spend down their money to zero. How much money could they spend? And to end your retirement with zero, you would need to spend $61,000 per year, or 6.1% withdrawal, and continue spending that amount inflation adjusted for the next 30 years. So you'll see here in this chart that it starts at 61,000 and then you just begin to inflate that amount each year by 3%. We're not doing a spending smile or anything on this. We're just having the spending increase at 3% a year. So in the scenario to end the retirement with $0, this person could spend $61,000 a year inflation adjusted. That's a 6.1% withdrawal rate, significantly higher than the typical 4%. But here's the kicker. You wouldn't touch your principal in this scenario for the first 17 years. But let's get more pessimistic. Some people are like, well, that's a little too optimistic. So in scenario B, he looked at a 7% rate of return with a 4% rate of inflation. And this scenario, if you wanted to end your retirement after 30 years with zero, you would have to spend $49,000 a year inflation adjusted, or a 4.9% withdrawal rate. And in this case, you wouldn't touch your principal until the 18th year of retirement. But here's the most shocking part. He continued doing some more research and he looked at market data going back to the 1870s. And he said, what would have happened if someone had had a 60-40 portfolio and had pulled out 4% per year? What he found was exceptionally rare that retirees who pulled out 4% per year at doing this Monte Carlo analysis going all the way back to 1870, it was exceptionally rare that retirees finished with less than they started with. If you're going to underline anything, this is the part I would underline. Retirees finish with more than double their starting wealth in 2/3 of the scenarios. So he runs these Monte Carlo scenarios going all the way back to 1870. And in more than 2/3 of the scenarios, retirees who pull out 4% a year end with double the amount of wealth that they started with. In fact, and you maybe underline this too, you're more likely to finish with 5 times your starting wealth than to finish with less than you started with. I'll say that again. You are more likely to finish with 5 times your starting wealth than you are to finish with less than you started with. Many retirees will have more money at the end of their retirement than they started with because they didn't know they could safely spend more. Now, if your goal is to end retirement with a large pile of money you want to give to charity, or you want to leave money to your family, that's great. But many people I talk to have hopes and dreams and things they wish they could do, but they didn't know they could spend the money. So what's the cause and what's the solution? So going back to the Journal of Financial Planning, the author said, fear, failure to plan, and a lack of confidence in strategies may be significant contributors to conservative consumption. And what they found is that most people have never really thought systematically about how they're going to withdraw their money. And of the ones who did think about it, so most people don't even think about it, and of the ones who have thought about it, only 40% of the people actually have a plan. Most people are just winging it. In fact, I'm guessing many of you watching this video, you're just winging it, relying on gut feelings, and it's causing you to underspend. I'm reading from the study here. Feelings of inadequate preparation shift retirees from spending to preservation. Rather than long-term planning, retirees become short-sighted and overly rely on intuition. Meaning, instead of using data, people are just relying on their intuition. They're just making decisions from their gut instead of making their decisions from a data-driven plan. What happens when you're just making a decision from your gut or you're just making your decision from intuition? Loss aversion kicks in. And when loss aversion kicks in, spending money feels like losing money. Right? So when you spend the money, your portfolio dips and you feel like you're losing money. And so what ends up happening is people stop spending. Another thing that causes people to underspend is honestly the financial planning industry. The financial planning industry, or maybe I should better say the wealth management industry, often encourages underspending because it keeps accounts large, and larger accounts mean higher fees. I had a client that I argued with over and over again, telling them they could spend more money, and they just kept replying over and over again. I don't know how that is true. My previous advisor said I could only spend 2% a year. And no matter how many meetings we had, they just would not believe me that they could spend more. So now we know some of what causes people to underspend. How do we fix this? To fix it, you need two things. You need to know what your money is for. You need to have a plan for your money. And you need confidence to spend. Every conversation at our firm starts with purpose. What's the purpose for this money? Money is just a means to an end. You have to give it a purpose. If you want to leave it a giant inheritance, that's perfectly fine as long as that's your goal. But underspending has real consequences. It means fewer trips to see the grandkids. It means skipping that dream vacation. It means not fixing up the backyard. It means not helping family members buy their first house. It means living with constant money anxiety. So how do you have confidence to spend? One option is you can buy an income annuity. If you are really anxious about spending money, annuitized income might give you peace of mind. It won't maximize wealth, but it can maximize spending confidence. The average person with an annuity spends twice as much money as someone with a similar portfolio invested in the market. Now, the portfolio owner ends up richer, but the annuity owner feels more secure. Now, this comes from a study that I read a few years ago, and I did a video on this study, and I will put a link in the description below. But as I said, the annuity owner feels more secure, even if they end up with less money. And that's fine, but it's not my favorite solution. The approach I recommend most is a dynamic income strategy, which is a more strategic, data-driven guardrails strategy. Instead of guessing and relying on intuition, you create an evidence-based spending plan. This means stress testing your portfolio against historic market conditions. So seeing what would have happened to your portfolio during historic downturns and how it would have impacted your spending. But it also means building in flexibility to adjust your spending based on market performance. Scenarios I showed you before from Michael Kitces, the spending just continues to increase each year based upon the rate of inflation. In reality, we find that if people are willing to adjust their spending during market downturns, they can spend more money during the retirement. So building in flexibility to adjust spending based on market performance allows you to spend more money. Next, creating spending buckets for massive down events in the market really help people to feel more confident to spend. In reality, you could run a very successful dynamic income strategy without having buckets. But what I find is having buckets earmarked for market downturns really help people to be able to feel more confident in their spending. So we use a bucket strategy in conjunction with a dynamic income strategy. And the bucket strategy simply means that we do some liquidity tiering. We want to make sure that you're able to spend the money that you need to spend without selling into a down market. And then finally, you need regular reviews to ensure that your spending is on track. So you set this plan up, then you just need to check it every so often to make sure that your spending is in line with the plan. What I find is that most of the strategies, like a probability of success based plan, creates unnecessary stress. Retirement is not pass fail. It's adaptable. It's dynamic, which is why we call it a dynamic income strategy. And dynamic spending helps you understand when a change might be needed and how much of an adjustment might be required. And it also helps you understand the likelihood that you might have to adjust your spending during retirement. Ultimately, what I found is that by having a dynamic income strategy, you have the confidence to spend the money that you need to spend in retirement, and you also have the the peace of mind that comes from having a plan and knowing what you need to do in the event of the market downturn. So if this sounds good, you're like, yes, this is what I'm looking for. Here are some practical next steps. First, define what your money is for. Write down your spending goals. What experiences matter most? What legacy do you want to leave? And then the question I'd really spend some time on is, what would you do if you gave yourself permission to spend? And just allow yourself to dream for a moment. And then second, once you've done that, once you've figured out what you're going to do with your money, create an income plan. Put another way, create a robust financial plan. Now, the easiest way to do that is to hire a financial advisor who will walk you through a full plan and help you manage it along the way. Now, clearly, I do this for a job, so I am biased. But personally, I think investing in a financial advisor who can help you spend with confidence and give you peace of mind is worth every penny you will pay. Well, within a reason. You've worked hard your whole life. You've saved responsibly. And now it's time to give yourself permission to spend in line with your goals. Now, if you're interested in a free strategy session, we would love the opportunity to chat with you at Foundry. You can schedule a call using the link below. Also, I'll put a link in the description below to the Michael Kitces article and the research study from the Journal of Financial Planning if you want to look at the data for yourself. And if you want to know more about a dynamic income strategy and what it looks like, particularly contrasted against a probability of success version, I've got a video where I go into that a bit deeper, and you can watch that here.